Welcome back to the London Futurist podcast. Kenneth Cukier is the Deputy Executive Editor of the Economist newspaper. For the past decade, he was the host of its weekly tech podcast, Babbage. He's co-author of the 2013 book Big Data, a New York Times bestseller that's been translated into over 20 languages. He's a regular commentator in the media and a popular keynote speaker from TED to the World Economic Forum. Ken recently stepped down as board director of Chatham House and a fellow of Oxford's Saïd Business School. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and his latest book is Framers on the Power of Mental Models and the Limits of AI. A fun fact, Ken and I first met in Bun Hill Field Cemetery in 2015, where we were both visiting the grave of Thomas Bayes, of the famed Bayes theorem in probability, which is the foundation of modern AI. It must have been disconcerting for him to be recognised there by a total stranger, but he handled it with great aplomb. Ken, welcome to the London Futurist podcast.
Thank you. So pleased I can be here.
Ken, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, David.
So I thought we'd start with a very easy question. I couldn't find the person who said this most memorably, perhaps you know, but The Economist used to be notorious for being great at predicting the past, but weak on predicting the future. But it seems to me that it's improved its coverage of the future a great deal in one respect, namely its coverage of AI. In the first few years after the 2012 Big Bang in AI, The Economist used to delight in sneering about AI hype. But now I can't think of any media outlet that understands today's AI better or explains it better. What changed?
That's a wonderful aphorism. I'm sure it was true for the time that it was put forward, and I sadly do not know the author of it, but I will look for it because I actually embrace it. I embrace it in part because I think it will keep us humble. As people who think a little bit more than others about the state of the world and where things go, we do need to recall that we're not omniscient and no one knows the future. And in fact, the future is to be created. And so the best thing I think we can do in our journalism is not only describe where we see the trends, but help our readers get there and actually build it and understand their sense of agency in being owners of the future, not participants and passive observers to the forces of history. To AI, what changed? Well, I don't think anything was deliberate. I can't point to any conversation, news meetings in which there was a shift. But I think we do have a natural skepticism for technologies. And I think that's very healthy in journalism in general and in The Economist as well, in which we really have a great appreciation and innate sense of the potential and the theory and idea of progress. So that skepticism helps us, but it doesn't always help us. Sometimes it makes us look, I think, buffoonish. And I banged that drum very loudly. I was quite angered, in fact, by what I saw as a knee-jerk skepticism about some of these technologies, because although there's much to cheer and much to fear and have foreboding about some of these technologies, we are in a state where we didn't have them, we could adopt them. I think we had a moral imperative to adopt some of these great technologies to improve humanity, and that we should be open-minded and open-armed for these technologies, while also then doing the hard part of figuring out, well, how do we prevent the downsides of these technologies? And so with AI, like with other technologies, I think it was just an editorial ethos, maybe I helped promote that, of saying we would be foolish and not adhering to our own values if we didn't welcome these technologies and really try to understand them. And then, like all technologies, figure out how to make sure that it works for human values, that planes don't fall out of the sky, that nuclear reactors don't explode.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I think there's often good cause to be skeptical about predictions of technology. The grounds for skepticism are usually about the timing rather than the thing itself. Whereas most media outlets seem to say, well, these things will never happen. And I have a rule which I've completely failed to promulgate, which is Callum's rule, which is that any forecast about technology that omits timing is piffle. Because very often, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, many of the technologies that we're seeing the beginnings of today, they are going to arrive in full fat form. We just don't know when. And what very often happens is there's a bit of an advance. A load of people say, hey, it's here. More skeptical people say, no, not yet. And a lot of people say, no, never. And that last thing is a bit of a mistake. So congratulations on bringing The Economist up to speed on that, if I can say that. But one thing I think The Economist still doesn't do with regard to AI is cast its eye more than 5 years or so, or perhaps more than 10 years into the future. I don't think I've seen on The Economist a discussion of what artificial general intelligence and what superintelligence will mean, or a genuine exploration of the economic singularity, the time when most human jobs are done by machines. Is that because you collectively, as an editorial group, think these things will never happen, or because you think it would frighten and alienate your readers?
No, it's neither. It's a correct observation that we've not thought about what these technologies would mean, let's say, 50 years into the future. So within the lifetime of some of the younger members of staff. But I would then say, well, we actually don't write any article, whether it's about geopolitics or whether it's about culture or whether it's about economics, that looks so far ahead as 50 years into the future. And the reason why is there's no obvious format with which to do that. We're a news weekly in which we tend to do a combination of trends that looks to the here and now and takes the weak signals and puts a magnifying glass to it so people can see it more exposed for what it is, so they understand what will be a strong signal tomorrow, so they get an early look at that. We've done that with lots of different stories, whether it's the right to die, to womenomics. We put gay marriage on the cover in the early 1990s with the headline, "Let Them Wed." It was a wedding cake with two men in tuxedos holding hands. To the rights of autistic people and how smart workforces would redesign their workplaces to support employees with autism, which I think will be commonplace in 15 years and today doesn't exist at all. So we don't actually do this. Part of it may be a humble reluctance to say we don't really know. And if we do put forward ideas, they are speculation. They could be informed speculation. They could be reasonable. And I'd even add to that, they could also make a contribution. So how would I get around that as an editor? The first is that we do have different forms in terms of journalistic products, if you will, within the newspaper that allows us to leave the world of here and now and think bigger and different thoughts. So we used to have a supplement called The World If, in which was just counterfactual articles. That could fit into it. The World Ahead is something that we do, but we only look 1 year ahead. We could do this, and I think it would be very good if we just labeled it very clearly as informed speculation of multiple possibilities. And we had a multiplicity of ways in which the world could go. And also then gave second-order effects of how would people educate their children in such a world, look for jobs themselves in such a world and train. How would they be a better investor in such a world? How would they want to vote in such a world? So the answer is, yeah, you might see that yet to come.
Well, that would be great.
But there's a big however here. Your presumption is that there is an economic singularity, and your presumption is that AGI is possible. And I've always been a little bit on the fence and somewhat reticent and a little bit retreating when you've gone full throttle on that view. And the more I think about it, the more I feel confident, a small margin, statistical confidence, that those things may not ever happen.
Well, let's get into the economic singularity a bit later, but on the idea of superintelligence, firstly, you got the magazine, 1816. I imagine you can put whatever you want in that. But more importantly, you say you could speculate about AGI and superintelligence happening in 50 years, and you're quite right. It may not happen. We don't know for sure it will. But one of the people who's most likely of all the people currently on the field to make it happen, i.e. Sam Altman, co-founder of OpenAI, thinks it's going to happen in a decade. So if it's a possibility that it could happen in a decade, really, he thinks full fat AGI could happen in a decade. That's an extraordinary possibility, which I would have thought even a fairly short-term focused news organization should be thinking about. And even if you think it's 50 years ahead, even if you were confident it's 50 years ahead, which I don't see how we could be, as Stephen Hawking remarked, I think it was actually Stuart Russell and Max Tegmark who remarked it for him, he remarked, if we knew there was a very superior alien intelligence going to land on the Earth in 50 years' time, or if we believed it was going to happen, we wouldn't just sit around saying, well, it's 50 years away, don't need to worry about that. We'd be marshalling all our resources to think, what on earth do we do about this? We'll be right back after a quick break.
The People in Performance podcast offers insights into the strategic competencies, behaviors, and results needed to increase the performance of employees and leaders. The show looks at all areas of the world of work, including attraction and recruitment, onboarding, training, and succession planning. Tune in to get a better handle on the stages of workforce planning you need to master in order to guarantee long-term success in a rapidly changing world of work. New episodes drop each week. Check out the latest People in Performance episodes on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on socials and read the latest articles at pppod.com.
It's not just Sam Altman, by the way, who has such views. There are online prediction marketplaces. There's one called Metaculus. They have a couple of aggregated forecasts from a whole bunch of people. One of them is, when will artificial general intelligence be readily known in a weak form? And I think the current estimate is 2028, which is just 5 years away. And they have a fuller definition of artificial general intelligence, which is now coming in predicted in 2040, 17 years away. So Sam Altman may be a little bit of an outlier, but there's a lot of people who have given this thought, and they see faster progress than was expected with these large language models. More capabilities emerging unexpectedly. So one of the themes for 2023, I believe, is emergence. These models, which were not expected to have particular features, unexpectedly do demonstrate these features. So people are scrabbling to figure out how far could this go, especially when new combinations are factored in.
When you say these features, David, what features are you referring to?
I'm referring to combinations of the existing systems, which often fabricate, they often hallucinate, with other systems that can fact check on their behalf. So it's a bit like a creative team, a team of human creatives. Somebody comes up with a whole bunch of crazy ideas, and there's a slightly more sensible person who says, well, these 8 I'm not going to go with, but these last 2 ideas, yeah, let's do some more work on it. So that's a combination of different AIs cooperating. After all, GANs, generative adversarial networks, one of the biggest bits of progress in the late 2010s, although they've been overtaken in turn by stable diffusion, they made their progress because they had 2 systems, one of them saying, how about this, how about this, how about this, and another one saying, no, this isn't good enough. This one's really good. And they had a nice little competition. So it's the combination of different effects. We might have an intuition engine which figures out by itself, hey, at this stage, I shouldn't rely on my intuition anymore. I should do a Google search. I should look this up on Wikipedia. I should call Wolfram Alpha to do some maths. And so just like our human brain is composed of many elements which combine slow and fast thinking for our general intelligence, there may be these systems combining in the next few years which unexpectedly come much closer to artificial general intelligence than was thought to be possible, say, 2 or 3 years earlier.
Okay. I fear that as we dive into this conversation, we're going to get tripped up in what will be seen historically as a really uninteresting conversation. What will trip us up will be just definitional. I'll give an example of what I mean by that. Nobody talks about the Turing test today. Why does nobody talk about, is it going to pass the Turing test? And the reason why is that by the time we had computers, really in the last 5 years or so, AI that could do what the Turing test put forward, it was painfully obvious to everyone that that was just a really rather pathetic way of judging AI. It's a test of your idiocy rather than the machine's intelligence. It's a test of deception rather than of capability. It was, in terms of the original formation, text-based when we would do it in lots of other ways now. It's similar to saying, that's a really good spaceship. How many horsepower is it? Like, your base measure is horsepower, the horse? That was really interesting when steam engine was replacing the horse, but you wouldn't measure a rocket ship by horsepower. There's other ways to do it. So I fear that we'll be stuck in this definitional world as AI makes more and more progress and does more and more extraordinary things that exceeds our ability to understand and will solve many of our problems. We won't be talking about AGI anymore. And the reason why I feel that way, and that's where the definitional thing becomes, I think, a challenge for us, but here's where we could then maybe have that debate, is I don't believe we understand what GI is now. I don't think there's an accepted definition for it. I don't think we understand all of what it entails. This is just general intelligence. Who is a human being? And what is the mind capable of? Taking into consideration, of course, that there's people who are clever as a whip and those people who, like me, who are dumb as a doornail. And we all are going to be in this world of GI, making decisions both with emotions and making decisions with rationality and thinking through them and making good decisions and sometimes making terrible decisions. Everyone who smokes and eats a bag of Doritos on their couch for the fourth night in a row watching Netflix is making a really bad decision. But they're exhibiting GI. Is that what we want for our AI systems? No, of course not. So if we agree that we're going to have incredibly performant AI, let's just agree with that. If somebody is trying to make the case that we're going to have AI that can do all the things that a human being can do, I think they're crazy.
Really? You think that will never happen, or you think it won't happen for centuries?
I don't think that you want that to be the standard. Do you really want AI to do all the things that...
It doesn't really matter if you want it, it's going to happen.
Well, there's a lot that humans can't do. Do we really want an AI system that makes complete mistakes, that has jealousy and greed and falls in love and exhibits betrayal?
The prospect isn't of an AI that duplicates humans' weaknesses. The prospect is of an AI that is much better at humans at doing all the work tasks that we do, that doesn't get tired, that doesn't make mistakes, that doesn't run out of initiative, that doesn't down tools and complaints.
And we already have that.
Not to a human level, we don't. Not to a human level, nowhere near to a human level.
We've got it to a superhuman level.
Only with regard to very specific tasks like making calculations or playing Go. At the moment, an AI couldn't run a company, for instance.
You know what? No, but we do have spreadsheets that run companies and accountants who oversee the spreadsheets. We do have IT departments who oversee databases. We have multinational companies of 4 people who have basically $10,000 worth of computer equipment and software, which 100 years ago would have required 100,000 people and a capital intensity of tens of millions of dollars to do. You know, I'm a great proponent of technology and a great proponent of AI. I think that we just need to reframe how we see it and how we talk about it. In narrow areas, we have superintelligence already. We have a breakaway explosion of productivity. We have a breakaway explosion of productivity when it comes to searching large corpora of text for information. It's called Google. And the cost to me, I can do it as much as I want, my waking days. Cost 0. Life's pretty good. We are both of a certain generation in which we remember driving to a library to get a fact before it closed.
Yep.
Like, yeah, hello. Try telling that to a child, to a Gen Z. So it's the G part that I think people are being beguiled by. First, I don't think it's that important. Secondly, it's not that necessary. I don't think we actually know what it is. It is so divorced from reality of how the human experience is that in time I think will be seen as laughable. And what I mean by that, divorced of reality. Just as when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're an uber alles, left brain, hyper-rational thinker, you see the world in hyper-rationality. And that's great if you're building a computer system, an AI system, that has to do calculation. That's great. But what about these other components of the human experience that doesn't rely on that pure calculatory, rational, or as the Greeks would put it, logos mentality, but what the Greeks called mythos, which was an equal and in some ways superior way of finding truth. Not myth as in that which is untrue or fantasy, but mythos, which is the spiritual, a sense of the divine, the sense of the human soul, and the sense of transcendence.
I'll refer to one of my colleagues on Facebook who is seemingly falling in love with ChatGPT. He finds mythical, spiritual significance in the conversations he's having with it. I think he's gone a bit off the deep end, but he is incredibly excited by these conversations. He doesn't think that the system is sentient, but he does find meaning and a sense of wonder and awe out of these conversations.
Yeah, I have conversations with Descartes. I read a book. Like, come on.
And people have conversations with their dogs as well.
Yeah, that's cute. But what we've learned is it's pretty amazing. If you have a neural network digest the entire corpora of written material in a given language, it can then, in a recombinatory way, give it back to us in a very fresh and dynamic way that is astounding. Look, I'm applauding. I think this is absolutely brilliant. It's going to transform so many things, and we're just at the outset of it. I do think, however, I still have a job.
But Ken, I do think you have a blind spot because you're obsessed with getting the terminology right and the conceptualization right. And I think you're a bit like a person who's grown up with horses being the way you get around, looking at steam engines coming and saying, well, they haven't got the right sort of legs. They're not really ever going to work. And meanwhile, the world is moving around 5 times as fast because steam engines are working. And they never quite agree what the definition is, and the rail gauges change between countries, but they're there and they work. It doesn't really matter whether we understand how human brains work. It doesn't matter whether we understand exactly what we mean by general intelligence. If machines are going to get to the level of capability that they can do all the cognitive things that a human can do, and I see no reason whatever why they won't, then if and when that happens, it's going to be the most important moment in human history. It's probably either going to be very good or very bad, but it's certainly going to be remarkable. And there's just no reason I can see to say that it won't happen. And before I finish, I want to mount a bit of a defense for poor old Alan Turing. It's very easy to say the Turing test is rubbish if you regard the Turing test being over in 3 minutes. But if you say the Turing test, as Ray Kurzweil and Mitch Kapor have in their famous bet, if you say the Turing test actually, firstly, it's a test for consciousness, not intelligence. And secondly, it should go on for a week or a couple of days at least. And if during the process of that week or a couple of days, you remain convinced that this thing that you're communicating with is conscious, is aware, then you have to assume that it is, because that's the way we attribute consciousness to each other. There's no other way we do it. I can't look inside your head and see there's consciousness there. I attribute consciousness to you because the way we interact gives me all the phenomena of consciousness. But I can see that might take us down a bit of a rabbit hole. Let's go back to the AGI thing.
Or not, because my G argument, to be perfectly blunt, and you've put your finger on it, my concern about the G portion is a concern about consciousness and the sense of what I'll call the hypermaterialism of AI engineers to believe that consciousness can be substrate independent, which is a euphemism to say you can do it in silicon. You don't need a live biology to do it. I think that's completely wrong.
Take this example then. You have a person who's got a terrible brain disease. They're going to die. The only way to stop them dying is to replace their carbon mushy brain with a silicon one. And you replace the circuits in their brain. And we don't have the technology to get anywhere near this yet, but let's say in the future you do. And we replace each individual neuron with a silicon neuron. At what point do they stop having consciousness? If you replace the performance of every single neuron with a silicon device, then the silicon device that you end up with at the end of the process would do exactly the same as the carbon device was doing, which is create a brain, create a conscious mind.
That's right. That's the David Chalmers ship of Theseus argument for consciousness.
Theseus.
So I'll give the Kenn Cukier rebuttal. What if you had to do the same thing with organs? So we get rid of the liver and we get rid of the appendix, didn't need it anyway, and the kidney, well, we already have artificial kidneys, and the heart, we've got artificial hearts. And suddenly the entire body in our little Frankenstein monster is replaced by artificial things.
Hooray! When can I have this, please?
Exactly. Well, sadly, at that point, I have a feeling that you're going to be dead as a doornail, but on these artificial systems, as doctors know in emergency rooms, you can basically have someone who is in effect dead, and you can jimmy things up so you can have signs of life. They do this so that family members rushing in can actually see Aunt Matilda still in the process of shuffling her mortal coil rather than it having been gone.
So is my mother partially dead because she's had artificial hips?
Well, of course not. But the idea, though, is that the argument against Chalmers is that we can put in all of these different artificial elements, but we can accept that there's something called breath and something called air. They're different. There's a life force that exists in living beings.
Is this magic, this life force? Is it a spiritual thing?
Well, I would actually say, is it magical? Yeah, I think it's totally magical. Is it spiritual? Yeah, of course it is. Because we don't understand it whatsoever. We understand there is something as life, there is something that's death. It isn't complete mystery, so it's not really magical, but it is mysterious. and is part of a magisteria, to invoke that term. It's only in the past 150, maybe 400 years max that we've been so scientistic and tried to apply our rationality to all that is under the sun that we deny the most basic common features of life around us, which is this sense of life.
But it's only in the past 400 years that we've had the beginnings of a glimmer of a clue about how the universe works. We climbed out of the slime 400 years ago.
In the terms of the scientific method, yes. And of course, I want to reiterate, I'm the great proponent of Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton and Alan Turing and Ray Kurzweil and Demis Hassabis and Sam Altman. I do believe that this is a transformative technology that's going to improve many aspects of our lives. But I don't think we're going to be able to have artificial consciousness. I don't think we're going to have G. But let's go back to the substance again. I was the one who rang the bell saying it's going to be a tedious argument if we get stuck with definitions. So let's go beyond the definitions and not talk about this AGI element. But when AI can do most of the things that human beings can do, and I stress most because I don't think it can do all things, and I think that because humans will have capabilities, cognitive capabilities, that artificial intelligence will not be able to do. But AI will exceed human capabilities in narrow areas that will become greater and greater and greater until it sort of swamps what humans can do well. It already does in a zillion areas. But there's going to be some certain domains we could talk about where I think that will happen, where humans, I think, will always have a leg up, will always be able to do something machines can't do. And the point there, of course, is mental models. Framing the world, reframing the world, seeing the world in a new way, and then using their imagination and pragmatism to create it, coming up with right answers and wrong answers, experimenting, and then getting the right answer. Now, you can have machines do that, but divorced of the human experience, I don't think they're going to do it in a way that's going to be as good and effective and beneficial as human beings. But interstellar space travel, of course, AI is going to be there, not humans.
2 decades ago, people made the same arguments about music. They said, in order to create soul-moving music, you need to have an understanding, an internal view of human experience. But then AIs have been able to duplicate music, which has passed a Turing test of a sort, the musical Turing test, in which musically literate audiences were given 3 pieces of music, one by the original Johann Sebastian Bach, but not so well known, so people wouldn't recognize it in advance, one written by a human modern composer in the style of Bach, and one written by an AI in the style of Bach. And they were asked, which moved you most? Which was the most powerful? And it typically was the one by AI. So it seems that a lot of what was formerly thought to be deeply special about humans can be encapsulated, after all, in some algorithms.
But David, isn't it interesting? Not only are you invoking, but the researchers themselves chose the one composer in all of the history of music that is probably the most mathematical and precise in his composition. The patterns of Bach are remarkable because even in the 1800s, people felt like it had to have been written by an algorithm. But they were not thinking of a computer algorithm.
I just have to jump in here because there's a fantastic comment by Carl Sagan, which is very relevant. Whether Bach is very mathematical or not, it still does move people. It's still regarded by some people as sublime. To the extent that Carl Sagan said, when asked why they hadn't included any Bach on that ridiculous satellite that was sent out inviting aliens to come and destroy us, when asked why Bach wasn't on that recording desk, he said, that would be bragging.
Beautiful. Sagan was a phenomenal, phenomenal man. If he didn't say that, I'd say, well, because we want them to be impressed with us. We don't want to move them to tears. Look, AI can recreate Bach, but can it create the next Bach? This is the classic conundrum. AI can be the world's best Go player, but can it actually create the game of Go, which is a different form of intelligence?
Actually, it can.
Yes, I am well aware that we've gone through ChatGPT and we've created a new board game that people are playing. However, the real story, as you know, behind the curtain, is that ChatGPT came up with hundreds of different potential board games, and human beings ranked it in terms of how much they'd enjoy it and what would be good. And therein is my point. Can we actually have that ranking and sorting by a machine, or do we need humans to do that? Point Callum Chase may be the case. Okay, Ken, to anticipate what Callum's going to say, we're going to have a universe in which we're going to have AI doing incredible things, and one person will have a job to sort it and rank the algorithm, and everyone else will be playing games and having fun. Point Cukier, we haven't destroyed all jobs, we've destroyed all minus one job. Possibly, but I don't think so.
But isn't that significant? Isn't that already happening? You've already referred to multinational companies run by only 4 people. The big Silicon Valley companies, if you compare them to the big companies in Detroit from a generation ago, revenues are broadly comparable when you do the inflation adjustment, but the number of employees in Detroit was far more than the number of employees in big tech. So aren't we already seeing, to use some reframing to give a nod to your recent book, this is not a future concern, isn't it very much a present concern? That more and more people are finding themselves already displaced from jobs and careers that they thought were sure things for their lives.
Yes, they absolutely are. The economy is changing radically, and the human resource intensity of the structure of the company has radically changed and will always be radically changed. 2 points to that. The first one is, who says that a company and its corporate structure should have a lot of employees? That's just an artifact of the 1600s and 1700s when the joint stock corporation was created. And what we're actually seeing more interestingly is the nature of the company is changing so that we could actually have, if you will, projects rather than companies. So you could imagine a commingling of people coming together for economic activities, not with this sense of institutional eternal time, which a company is supposed to be, but ones in which you can actually benefit and do your work, whether it is for 30 minutes or for 3 years or 30 hours, and then leave again. And we need to have legal and financial infrastructures that permit that form of combinatorial economic activities. A way of looking at that is open source projects in which the developers have reached through rights to the technologies and the combinatorial technologies of the code that they've developed for other products that are used based on their open source code in their contributions. So the code is used in this dimension and it's free to use and to reuse. But if it's used in this way, they actually get a touch to it. Now, that doesn't really exist, but it easily could.
Yeah, our mutual friend Daniel Hume is working away at that and actually to quite a significant degree putting it into practice in his company, Sotalia. But I want to bring you back to what I think is the main point in all of this, which is your belief that there are certain cognitive abilities which will forever be reserved for humans. And I just don't get it. I don't understand why you think that unless there's something mystical and magical, and I do mean God-created, magical, beyond the realm of science, unless you think there's something like that going on inside the head, why would it not be possible to recreate it, either by design or accidentally, in silico? Why do you think that there's this hard stop, which AI is always going to run up against? It can't do this thing, whatever this thing is.
So I guess there's 2 arguments. The first one is, I don't think we understand our own abilities, mind, and human experience enough to be able to recreate it.
I want to kill that argument before you go any further. Just because we don't understand it doesn't mean to say that we can't recreate it. We didn't understand how airplanes flew. The Wright brothers had no clue about the basic principles of flight. And for the first 10, 20 years, possibly quite a lot longer, we didn't understand how planes work. But they did work. So just because we don't understand how a brain works doesn't mean to say we can't create it by design or accidentally.
This is called the pragmatic turn in AI, by the way. AI used to be trying to understand humans and copying it, but more recently we've had systems that manage to duplicate human activity without us understanding it.
Okay, fair enough. Then what we're recreating is the simulacrum of human intelligence, not human intelligence. The first argument, I think, should stand on its own. The analogy with airplanes doesn't feel exact. I'm sure that in ancient Greece, they felt that they understood the human mind and how it worked. And of course, now we have neuroscience and we're seeing totally different elements to it. I believe that in 50 years, we're going to look at our current understanding of the human mind and how it works, and it's going to just look as cartoonish as it looks to us, to the ancient Greeks. So that's the first part. The second one is, this now gets to the spiritual. A large part of what it is to be a human being is not information, but the absence of information. In many religious traditions, it is an emptiness, what the Greeks called kenosis, what in theology is called the apathetic. And the apathetic is a negative theology in which it says, I don't understand. It's what in Christian mysticism was called the cloud of unknowing. It's the unknowing. It's the emptiness. It's the silence and the solitude in which transcendence and insight comes. But again, it's from the absence of information, not from information. It's from an emptiness. Those people who are religious will perhaps have those experiences. Those people who meditate may do that. But do the ordinary people living their lives do that? I think at certain times. I think at times of crises where they are facing a very personal loss, whether it's the loss of a loved one, a danger to themselves. There's lots of moments in life in which we find ourselves alone with ourselves in a period of mental vacuity, and in which through the ambition of reaching a point of emptiness, we learn something. Now let's think about current AI and how it works. It needs information in order to do things, not the absence of information. When we have AI that in effect meditates and prunes itself and cries over the death of a loved one, and then makes decisions that are slightly in ever so subtle ways different, then we might have an AI that can do absolutely everything. I put that forward because it just seems so preposterous.
Why?
We're embodied, they're not embodied. We understand emotion, we don't understand beauty, we don't understand truth, we don't understand ourselves. But we're going to have an AI that can do all the things that human beings can do. It's through the mystery of who we are and not understanding ourselves and our potential for trying to be better in someone else that we are able to be who we are and exceed our capabilities and transcend ourselves. But an AI is going to be able to do all of those things. AI is going to be a great mimic of many of the things we're going to do, and is going to do it 100,000 times better than us. And it's going to lead to problems with employment, but it's not going to do absolutely everything a human can do. And I think that the aspiration is, wait for it, idolatrous. Turning us into gods, making our machines as our new idols.
Okay, I'm going to buy you a beard and a turban. Ken, that was a wonderfully elegiac answer. I can pretty much disagree with all of it, but we don't have time to pursue it. Excellent conversation. Thank you very much indeed for joining the London Futurists.
My pleasure. I've had a lot of fun with this, and I'm surprised that it took the turn that it did, but bring it on.
It's been great to hear your words, and thanks for being a good sport.
Thanks.